Luke Thomas came out with an opinion on old Chael. Luke Thomas came out and he said he was a good fighter, he was not a great fighter. And I thought that was a little bit interesting from a couple of perspectives. First off, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a great fighter? Does it mean you won a bunch of championships? Does it mean you won a lot of matches? Does it mean you had a lot of skills? I don't fully know what the classification would be, and perhaps that would be unique to Luke. But it is talking out of both sides of your mouth when you're a guy like Luke who is saying, I don't love the entertainment era. I love the competitive era. Luke, there was nobody that steered the ship of the competitive era more than me. What, you saw me lose some fights? My last 13 fights were all against world champions. Tell me anybody else that had that schedule. Oh, and by the way, of those 13 fights, they spawn over 3 weight classes. Show me one guy who ever did that. So it's very tough to fit into your confines of what a good versus a great fighter is while listening to somebody say they don't like the entertainment era, they want the competitive era. You're talking to the greatest competitor the sport has ever seen. Anybody, anywhere, anytime. Top of the bill, any weight class, any way you want to do it. And not for nothing, it spanned over 4 different generations of fighters. There was nobody fighting since 1997 except for me. So in what era do I get to be great? Certainly the skills that I possess right now today, as a retired fighter, right now today, would make me the belle of the ball against the guys that I started with in 1997. Certainly there would be no question about that. So the skills I had today, but I was fighting in the era when I started, I would have had all of the championships. I would have had those championships up till 2006, 2007, 2008. I didn't even get my run until 2009. So I thought that it was a little bit confusing in terms of what criteria are you using to be a great fighter? A fighter that was able to make it 22 years into his mid-40s, fighting in yet the 4th generation of fighters that evolved and came along every step of the way. In the last year, fought 3 world champions, beat 2 of them. There was also something very interesting, guys. I don't really know why this tangent is more about defending a career that I walked away from, but I did feel that some of it was a little bit odd if you're getting media from people and information from people and their opinion pieces from people, and now we can be revealed with that information. If he's saying I was a good fighter but not a great fighter, is he giving any consideration to the fact that I'm fighting my 4th generation? 4 different classes have come through this sport from the time I've started until the time I stopped, and all of them are gone. I outlasted every one of them. Fought for 5 world championships. Won one of them. They didn't give me the belt. My opponent didn't make weight. One. Does that not make you a great fighter? Perhaps it does not. Perhaps it does not. There's nothing I can do about that. It is open for opinion. I was just surprised that that was the conclusion that Luke had come to. Because many of the people I had beaten did qualify on his list as great fighters. I kind of scratched my head and go, wait a minute, if he's a great fighter and I beat him, how do I only qualify as good? Are you saying by the time I left, my skills had gone down and I was only good, or I was never a great? That would surprise me, in fairness. And with arrogance. I realize the arrogance in making that statement, but it would surprise me. I was the first fighter to ever be ranked simultaneously in the top 10 in 2 different weight classes. The first fighter ever, and there's only been 3 to this day, I'm one of them, first fighter ever to be ranked in the top 10 of 2 different weight classes at the same time. A number 1 contender repeatedly. Held a number 1 ranking by ESPN and Sports Illustrated for 2.5 years at a middleweight. Was that not great? That seems like that would be pretty great to me. It just seems that it would. Maybe not. Maybe you got to get to the championship. I don't know. I don't know what Luke was looking for there. I've always also had a piece of my career that as soon as I beat a guy, that guy wasn't good anymore. I could never get around that. And I don't really know where that came from. I think that comes from the fact that I do things like I'm doing right now, where I come out and I say a whole bunch of nice things about myself. That really can turn some people off. There's really no quicker way to get people to turn on you than you saying good things about yourself. That's just human nature. I get it. But I will look back on my career and look at a gentleman named Paulo Filho. And when I fought Paulo Filho, he was 16-0, and he was the number one ranked fighter in the world. To put that in perspective for you guys, Paulo was 1, Anderson was 2, Dan Henderson was 3, and at that time, I was number 9. That's how the world rankings went. I beat Paulo Filho. And by the way, Paulo Filho trained with Anderson Silva. They were teammates. Anderson Silva did not disagree with the ranking that Paulo should be 1 and that he should be 2. They were both managed by Ed Soros, who spoke publicly, who did not disagree with the rankings that Paulo should be 1 and Anderson should be 2. So this is a very good fighter. That's all I'm saying about Paulo Filho. He was a champion. He was undefeated. He had a great skill set. He was a great fighter. And our matches were not very competitive. In fairness to me, they were not very competitive matches. We fought a total of 4.5 rounds. I won every single round. That's official. Every judge in every round. So then it came out that Paulo, and then fill in the blanks. Paulo had problems, and Paulo had this, and Paulo wasn't himself, and he had all sorts of stuff. But the credit was never given to me. Which I just thought was a little bit peculiar. That's very odd. We didn't just fight once, we fought twice. And in both of those fights, the media found a way to create excuses for my opponent. They moved him down in the rankings. They moved Anderson to number 1, and I stayed at number 9. Took out a guy that nobody else ever beat, never even won a round against, then took him out again, winning all 4 rounds, didn't move in the rankings. He came down. He's no longer what he used to be. Chael doesn't move up. Thought that was a little bit weird. Went out, fought the number 1 contender. Number 1 ranked guy in the world, Yushin Okami. Won all 3 rounds. Story the next day, Yushin didn't fight very well. Not Chael did. Went into the new number 1 contender, guy named Nate Marquardt. Won all 3 rounds. Maybe Nate should think about changing weight classes. That was the story. I didn't move up in the rankings. Stayed at number 9. It was just a story of my whole career. As I got towards the end of my career, I was starting to fight some guys that were also veterans like me. Wanderlei Silva comes to mind. Rampage Jackson comes to mind. When I beat those guys, same deal. Wanderlei shouldn't be fighting more. Not good job, Chael. Rampage shouldn't be at heavyweight. He's too slow. Now, nobody else has beat him at heavyweight. They're talking about main eventing him and putting him in there with Fedor, which is a fight I really hope they do. I would love to see Rampage versus Fedor. As a fan, that would just be a real box office draw for me. But aside from that, this was the narrative. Jonathan Snowden came out just recently and went as far as to say, this is my exact job, is to put these guys into categories and figure out who is where. Night I beat Michael Bisping, it came out that the judges had it wrong. The night I beat Shogun should be done. Shogun's still not done, and that fight was 6 years ago. It was just one of these interesting things where it didn't really seem to matter. Oh, and by the way, those fights I just told you about, over 22 years, 3 different weight classes, 2 different rule sets, on 3 different continents, in 7 different states. I offer no excuses. Think I felt good every time I walked in there? You wouldn't know, because I would never tell you. You think I wasn't injured ever for any of those? You would never know, because I would never tell you. If somebody gets the jump on me, you will never hear a dialogue started on my end about the excuse making. I will tip the hat, they will get their win, and they will get the credit, because that is what we agreed to. Does not matter who feels good. Does not matter who's injured. The contract says these 2 guys are going to fight at this weight class, under this rule set, on this day. That's the deal. That is the agreement. Come hook or crook, that is what we are going to abide by. But for some reason, when I would get the jump on those guys, it really was a tough spot for the media members. And the big reason many of those guys that I just named, whether it was Snowden, whether it was Thomas, whether it was Ioli, these guys want to be in media. That's what they want to do. Some of them went to school for it. They all trained for it. They got in the ditches and they trenched. They do a fine job. I came along with no goal to be in media, no training, no schooling, no hard work and no sacrifice, and took the top billing. And that can be an arrogant and brash statement. I'm well aware, but it's also just what happened. If I'm giving these guys a pass for saying what happened, then I'll say what happened too. The jealousy that they have for the work and the time and the goals that they have in relation to the position that they hold versus the position I hold infuriates them. It absolutely infuriates them. Do you really think that somebody with the knowledge of Luke Thomas could look at a career of mine who fought for 5 world championships in 3 different weight classes, just came out of the heavyweight Grand Prix, made it to the Final Four, and say that guy was just good? No, it's silly. It's silly to the highest of levels. And I don't think that he means it. I don't think it thought out. I think it was a level of jealousy. They will ask me, Chael, what will your legacy be? What do you mean what my legacy? First off, tell me what that word means. The way I interpret what will your legacy mean, it means how will you be remembered? I could take many guesses. And the answer they really want me to say, that they really want me to come back to, is what Kevin Iole said. As somebody who tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. That's what they really want me to say. I'm happy to say it. For some reason, they seem to think that will make me sweat. That was all part of the story. That was part of the career. If I got to live with it, then I'll live with it. But it seems to bring them a level of pleasure in making sure they can point that out. And anytime my fans come out and my audience comes out and tries to steer them back to Main Street and say, well, he was also a guy that fought for 5 world championships, and he was also a guy who did the heavy lifting, and he was also a guy that never backed out of fights, and he's also a guy that had 13 world champions in his last 13 fights and won 8 of them, then they will begin to pick on those opponents. They will begin to say that Wanderlei was old, and Rampage was big, and Shogun had slowed down, and Paulo Fila was fighting ghosts, and whatever the story could be. They'll call for Nate Marquardt's retirement, and they'll say that Yushin Okami was ranked too high. They'll do whatever they have to do. I'm willing to tell the truth. I never got falsely accused in this sport of anything. All those knocks they took against me, guys, I did them all. And the other side of the coin is, that was just the stuff I was caught for, and I can't speak any more candidly than that. When they came back with the list of things they found in my system, I breathed a sigh of relief that they didn't find all the rest. So if we're sitting around here telling the truth, let's tell the truth, gentlemen. You are green with envy. You are jealous as can be. I will make this video. 500,000 people will listen to it on iTunes within 24 hours. I will cut this video, put it on YouTube. 500,000 more will listen to it within 24 hours. You will make your videos, you will say your piece, and 15 people will hear it. So, gentlemen, I know you're paid on clicks. I know you beg me to come on your shows. I know where I go, the fans come. When the fans come, the fans click and you get paid. One of your revenue streams just came to a halt. I mean, if we're calling it, let's just call it straight, gentlemen. The jealousy will continue. I will continue to not care. Because I am Chael Sonnen. And you are welcome.